Okay, I think we might be good. Yeah, check. Let's see. Well, that's not going to give me what I want. Let's go to this. That's not what I want either. Chapter 19. That's not what I want either. There we go. Okay, got my voice. Cool. So, those of you that have checked my page already may have noticed that, hey, the stuff from earlier didn't have any sound because I neglected to turn on my mic. So I'm at home, well, at my mom's house, because she needs me to house it for her. So you may hear the birds screaming in the background. So that's fun. Anyway, we're gonna redo the stuff for today. It's not a whole lot. It was sort of a shorter day, so it's not a huge deal. I mean, it's a little annoying for me, but whatever. Get it done. All right. I mean, I do also have my like headset on rather than just a microphone, so I might not be able to hear the bird screaming in the background if he's being loud. He's in the other room, but this is an old house and all the doors don't close, so it's gonna make do with that. Right. Chapter 7. All right. Chapter 7 is early Middle Ages, which is, well, the next section. Um, moving beyond the ancient and into what would become the Middle Ages. So monks were early on, um, keeping the idea of the Christian world led world alive, withdrew from society. Early monks weren't like, well, what we'd see here with like man, these images work so much better when I'm not in that room with all the fluorescent lights on. Um, where they're in like the monasteries, in particular Monte Cassino, seen here. Um, but they were like, I described them as sort of like the stereotypical um, Asian monks that you'd see in like cartoons or movies or whatever, where they're like up in the mountains and not even like the Tibetan monks because they still have and I think Tibetan monks because I've been looking at a lot of old Batman stuff, but like hermits, like dudes living by themselves out in the middle of nowhere. Because you had like Egyptian and Syrian monks, where they were like the fringes of society. Eventually, you had Benedict and Arcia, created this form of monasticism in the West. Um, had a monastery of Monte Cassino, which again, right here. Wrote a rule or a guide for the monks, which became the Benedictine rule. It was a lot of the um, early tenets of what would be like standard monasticism. So rather than just some dudes living out in the wilderness by themselves, it started this. Monks lived together under an abbot. They lived in these monasteries. Oftentimes, they took vows of silence to better contemplate their spiritual mission. Um, so they, let's see, a lot of spiritual work, daily prayer, manual work, plowed fields, wrote manuscripts, built buildings. Um, and an important thing that I actually forgot to mention in class. So hey, I'm remembering something here. Work was seen as a good thing. Physical labor was seen as a good thing. I can hear the birds screaming in the background, so I don't know how good this is for you guys. Sorry. Um, Work was seen as a good thing, rather than something that a servant or slave did, because like back in the Greek and Roman times, physical labor was seen as something almost shameful. For example, um, I've read like Aristotle, for example, never didn't work a day in his life, and that was seen as like, that's the ideal. You don't have to work if you're, intelligent enough or rich enough. Um, Monasteries are largely self-sufficient. They were able to pretty much produce enough to survive. They did often trade with one another for goods they couldn't produce, um, which is important for a number of reasons. One, they actually traded. There wasn't a lot of, if any, trade between communities at this time. In class, I mentioned this. Like, I almost said towns, but there weren't towns at this time. All the cities and larger population centers had pretty much disappeared after the fall of Rome. Uh, and the communities that were left were so small that sending people out to trade with other communities was too resource intensive. They needed like every person and animal in the town to keep the town running. Again, my brain goes to Grimworld, where if you're going to send people and pack animals out to trade with other settlements, you got to have enough extra people and extra pack animals to send out, while also being able to defend yourself and keep the place running. Um, but the main thing with the monasteries, they didn't trade for like food. They would typically trade for like different kinds of ink, which is what I'm going to get into here in a minute. Well, I'll just go ahead and yeah. Okay, so here's what the monasteries look like. This is like this is a really scaled down, simplified model. Many of them were large and walled in, and yada yada yada. But anyway, you got the fields, you got the whole monastery itself. You've got these smaller huts out here for um, sometimes living space, sometimes just like stuff to do with the farming. Like here you have, are they making bricks perhaps? I can't entirely tell. That bird will not shut up. He's a parakeet my mom found just like in the yard, just randomly one day. And we have a lot of cats around here, so it's a miracle that she found him in one piece. Anyway, yeah. So this was like the main thing that the monks did, and why they would trade for. I'm talking, so he's got to make noise. Anyway, why they would trade for ink, because of these large illuminated manuscripts that they wrote. Um, Typically they would copy the Bible, also other holy books, typically, like the Torah, which is the Old Testament. The New Testament was typically not collected together in a single book yet, so it would be the various books of the Bible. But what's most important, oh, and also some pagan scripts, which were important because that's how a lot of these survived into, well, kind of into the modern day, but also specifically into like the Renaissance when they started being used again. Um, but it's important that instead of using papyrus like most of the people before this time did, they used parchment. And again, if you're like me and you've seen old movies and such, and you've seen the word parchment, but parchment is not just an old word for paper. It's animal skin. It's like thin leather, essentially. It's animal skin that's stretched out and dried and treated and basically used as paper, but it's essentially leather. And that stuff sticks around a long time. The sauce I mentioned in class, that well, I'll show you guys the Book of Kells a little bit later. That we still have some of these, like today, that are um, still in museums and such, and some of them are in such good shape that the uh the people at the museum can just like lift the cover of the case and turn the page of the book so that a different page will be on display, and then just like close the case back and lock it up so that it keeps the book safe, but like you can literally just turn the pages of this 1,000-year-old book because it managed to maintain its integrity for this long. So that's kind of amazing. Now, we don't use parchment anymore because it's really freaking expensive. Um, but yeah. This also is institutionalized reading and writing. So, in short, it made it so that Europe didn't lose literacy. We didn't have to start over from scratch and make up written writing again. Written writing. Reading and writing again, or the written language is what I was trying to say. Um, I think this dog needs to go outside. You get the bathroom? Yeah, okay. I'll be right back. This is the reason I'm over here is my parents went camping and I have to watch the dogs. So I'll be right back. Alright, let's see how long I can go for those dogs. Demand to be let back in, because unlike most dogs, they don't like being outside. They're big babies. Alright. um, yeah, so it kept reading and writing institutionalized within the monasteries, which was important. Very, very important, especially as we go on. So here is some of the eliminated manuscripts. We'll get more into that a little bit later. Meanwhile, over in Italy, We had the Lombards, which were a Germanic tribe, moved to northern Italy in 6th century, fought against Justinian's outposts. Now, initially they were Arian Christian, but they did convert into Roman Orthodoxy by 680. However, they continued to fight against the papacy uh, even after this. So the papacy was relatively weak and also was having conflicts with the Eastern Roman Church, um, as they had some disagreements on the nature of Christ. I trying to remember exactly what that was about. Um, I think it was the Trinity thing. I think it was on like the nature of Christ as like subordinate to or equal to the Father, and there was this whole kerfuffle about that, and they ended up like excommunicating each other. We'll get to. I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get to the this great schism later, but that's the whole thing. So there's the Lombards hanging out. They got a looks like a greyhound here. So I mean, I guess they had greyhounds back then, which I mean, uh, it would make sense. We've had dogs for a very long time. So Pope Gregory the Great, elected in 590, he had quite the life. He was a Roman aristocrat, a senator, a soldier fighting the Lombards, a monk, and also an emissary to Constantinople. So dude got around before he was elected pope. Usually, like they do some work in the church and then they become like a cardinal. And well, I mean, to become a cardinal, they have to do a lot in the church, but it's all church work. Like this dude's been all over the place. But most importantly, as pope, he made it so that monasticism will be officially promoted by the church, um, because that because the church itself, the papacy, um, was so weak due to the attacks by the Lombards and the spat with the Eastern Roman Church, that the monasteries were some of the strongest parts of the church, and they were not even like really officially part of the church. So he made them officially part of the church and like gave them a lot of authority within the church, which we'll see later, maybe not even this semester, but next semester, that's a common thing in the East as well when it comes to like Rome, not Rome, Russia especially. They're real big on their monasteries. He also sent Augustine to Britain, set up Metropolitan Bishop in Canterbury and York. So if you've read the Canterbury Tales, he is part of the reason to blame for that. They appoint ordinary bishops and had a more organized vision of the church. I think I've got that as a image here in just a minute. There's Gregory the Great. And there he is again. Oh no, I guess not. Well, I have it here in just a minute. I'll show you guys. Right. Bishops mediated between the church, or the political rulers, and the ordinary folks, because well, like the higher ups in the church, there are only so many of them, and while the population of Europe wasn't huge compared to today, there was certainly way more people than there were, political rulers or high church members. So the bishops were there as, go-betweens for the people. Their offices were for life, so they were around for a lot longer than some political figure that may get kicked out or overthrown. So, an area of the bishop's jurisdiction was under the diocese. Um, again, oh well, not so much again because you guys didn't hear me last time, but this is something that us being here in South Carolina probably aren't familiar with. But if you were raised in an area that was largely Catholic, all of this is really obvious. Like, oh yeah, bishops and dioceses and all that. This is this is just normal language. Yeah, diocese is where the bishop was, what their jurisdiction, where they, areas they oversaw. They would pay for repair or civic improvements, whereas counts only really wanted to get their taxes and spend them however they felt like, as opposed to using the taxes to actually help the people. So yeah, the church got really powerful really fast for a reason. Now, you might look at the Catholic Church in the last couple of hundred years and, consider them as being really powerful and not necessarily all that great, especially, again, raised Protestant. I remember there's a lot to be said about the Catholic Church, especially depending on your product, if you're raised Protestant. But like early on, they were very much the only ones helping the people. So here are the dioceses. Um, this was originally set up as you can see here, if you want to, you can translate a little bit of Latin. These are provinces, proconsular provinces. So, well, proconsular down here. But anyway, point being, these are the provinces that were set up by the Roman Empire, and as Augustine moved to uh, England, they more specifically set up the diocese as you can see, they're a little bit more even. Like down here, they're much more crowded with the higher population areas than over here. They're massive. I mean, just this one here is almost the size of England itself, because they had less people living over here. Whereas this is a lot more even territory wise. Do 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 do. What do you respond to this? Okay. Anyway, and then we have the saints. So whereas the bishops were the intermediary between the upper people in the church or the politicians and the people, the saints were the intermediaries between the common people and Jesus. And the way to talk to a saint was through the relics. The relics were oftentimes the bones of the saints, which, a little grisly, but I mean, it's the Middle Ages, so what are you going to do? Or sometimes their clothes or books, things they might have touched, although the bones were typically the most popular. Um, Part of the reason why the saints became a thing, was because Christianity was legalized. So there wasn't a constant stream of martyrs. The reasoning of this was, again, unlike with most Protestant denominations where you just like pray to Jesus and he handles it. Um we as mere humans are too lowly to speak to, God or Jesus. But during this time, when it's like, hey, a guy who got martyred for Christianity, so he's going to put in a good word for you once he gets to heaven, because obviously he went to heaven because he was martyred, like he died for being a Christian. There's no like more good you can do than that. But with Christianity being legalized, now you've got, typically the saints were often a lot of these martyrs. But you need to be able to contact them now so that they can intercede for you. Largely led by Pope Ambrose, or Bishop Ambrose, not Pope Ambrose. Bishop Ambrose. Um, but also, again, despite the martyr thing, saints were considered as still alive and active. They had simply risen to heaven and, left their bones behind, but whatever. Not a full Elisha deal, where he just straight up, full body went to heaven. Um, they're also thought to have miraculous powers, oftentimes healing. Um, again, if you go full bore into Catholic doctrine, apparently there's one that like helps you find things that you lost. So like I mean literally, I had a student whose mother was raised Catholic, and there was one particular saint that she hated because specifically, um, if she lost something, her mother wouldn't help her find it. She would say, "Oh well, pray to Saint so and so, and you'll find it." So she had to like walk around the house praying to Saint so and so while she was looking for like her shoes or whatever, and it just annoyed her to death. Yeah, that's I've met some interesting people over the years. Um, but also, in addition to whatever the people believed, this gave the bishops this gave the bishops real like tangible power in the real world because people were coming to them for their problems as opposed to going to the political leaders because well the political leaders just want your taxes and aren't doing anything to help you with them, whereas the bishops and the church are actually helping you, and also they have freaking miracles, and also because um the life expectancy isn't very high back then. It wasn't as low as if you look up what was the life expectancy in the year 800 or whatever. Um, the year saying it's like 30 isn't completely accurate because that factors in that a lot of children died at childbirth, and that brings the number way down. Like if you lived to, I'd say 15, you're probably gonna make it to like 50 or 60. Still not as long as most people live today, but like being relatively old was something you could guarantee back then as long as you made it to at least your teenage years. But a lot of children died. It was bad news. Anyway, but yeah, so the people came to them, and also, as I mentioned in class, um, people would straight up do pilgrimages, which again we'll talk about more later. But they would do pilgrimages to these churches that had these relics, and they would, give some donations. Even if it's just a little bit of money. Uh, these churches made money off of this. And when you have a lot of people coming through day in and day out, um, these churches became very rich very fast. And that's also real power. So there's some of the saints. Again, I wasn't raised Catholic, so I don't know any of them. Quick note on the Germanic kings. So after the Western Roman Empire fell, lands were ruled by a king, or in Latin, rex, but not the sort of divinely appointed monarch we think of today, as you would think of in like the Crusades, or even which the king you might think of in the that we were fighting in the Revolution. That wasn't really even the sort of king. Um, but it was like you had a group of generals, and this was the best general out of them. It was like the most, not even the smartest or like the best at leading battles, but he just was able to outmaneuver the others politically. Or maybe they just preferred to follow this guy. Um, and unlike later kings who had palaces and stuff, um, they couldn't stay in one place because since they were a general and they had a massive war band with them, they had to move around. If they stayed in one place too long, they would deplete the area of its food, which is wild to think about. Like they literally can't stay in one place for too long or they'll starve and everyone in that area will starve. um Also an important distinction to make. Um there weren't really land boundaries like there are today. The king was in charge of a people, not a land. So when it came to the Merovingians, for example, that we'll talk more about in a little bit, um, they were kings of the Franks, not the kings of Francia, which was technically the land that the Franks were on, but there weren't like lines drawn on a map of okay, this is where our land is, this is where the next people's land starts. That's not how it worked. I mean, even today, when we have maps of this period, we draw lines because that's how we understand it, but that's not exactly how it worked. Okay. Um, Frankish nobles would divide their wealth, which is to say land and gold, equally among their heirs, which is to say their sons. And rather than their sons taking each, you know, bit that was doled out to them and being happy with it, they would often murder each other until only one was left, and then that one would claim the rest of it for themselves. Because, why not? So here's this like really old depiction of a king of sorts. Again, just sort of the best general among other generals. Actually, I think this will be it for this section because, like I said, I didn't get very far in the class, and I really don't feel like pushing too far while I'm sitting at home and the birds screaming in the next room and the dogs are waiting at the door. So, um, when Clovis died in 511, his four sons proceeded to attempt to murder each other. Eventually, Clothar in 558 managed to take the throne because everybody else was dead. Unfortunately, he stayed on the throne for a whole 3 years before he himself died. So then his three sons repeated the cycle of murder until there was only one left. Needless to say, this really weakened the Merovingian line. If every time, you know, we're gonna get a new ruler, they're all the people that are in line for the throne are gonna just like have a civil war over it. It's gonna really really like devastatingly weaken not just the royal line but the people as a whole. Good thing for them. The Frankish kingdom was already really strong, so they're able to weather that. But what it did mean is that some other noble families who had worked on the Merovingians did gain more power because they still needed to run the kingdom while the Merovingian sons were busy murdering each other. So there was one uh, title, royal official, called a mayor of the palace, who became especially important. This was essentially, I compared this earlier to the prime minister in England, where he's basically in charge of England. England still technically has a king, but the king's not doing anything. The prime minister is in charge. Like the prime minister is politically essentially equal to our president in terms of like their place in the government. The king is just a figurehead. Now, obviously, it wasn't like that back then. The king still had a lot of power, but because the Merovingian line was becoming so weak, um, the mayor of the palace was becoming extremely important, and in particular, Pepin of Landen in 631 um, became especially important due to his own political maneuvering and consolidation of power, which we will get into more next time. But he's important to know because he is well, not the beginning of, but he's part of what will eventually become the Carolingian line, which is where we get Charlemagne, who I mentioned also this in class, which again, I didn't exactly have my mic on. Apparently, due to where this fell in the timeline of European genealogy, um, everyone in Europe is related to Charlemagne. So anyone with European descent, anyone that's like got European ancestry is related to Charlemagne. So yeah, it's a whole thing. Now, a lot of times it's not like you know, direct line relation. There's all sorts of ways that can be done, but he had enough kids so long ago that his bloodline essentially expanded to where everybody is in some way related to him. I don't know how all that works exactly, but that's what I found. Anyway, yeah. So here is the Merovingian kingdom, or kingdoms. You see here: Aquitaine, Burgundy, Austrasia. Huh. Uh, yeah. So you've got all this going on. Um, and there's some tributary kingdoms which are technically uh sort of independent, but they have to like pay money to uh the Frankish kingdoms to maintain that independence. But again, I mean you can see how there's these dotted lines. Like these aren't hard and fast boundaries. There's always some push and pull even within these boundaries. Um in fact, down here is probably the most hard and fast boundary because that's the line of mountains. um Yeah, and also the Alps are right here, so that's probably another decent line. But for the most part, there's always flux. Anyway, I gotta get these dogs in, and when we get back on Wednesday, hopefully I will remember to turn the mic back on. Things were a little chaotic today, so my bad. Anyway, yeah, I'll catch you guys on Wednesday. Also, as of this recording, no one has done their online test yet, so please do that. I did include a bit more extra when it came to like test security, so take a look at that. I know I mean, it's gonna take more doing. You guys are gonna need like a webcam and stuff. I want to make sure it's doable, but at least look at it. Nobody's even attempted the test yet, and it's due Wednesday, so give that a shot, guys. Anyway, talk to y'all later. Let me bring this up. Yep. All right. Bye.